I'm afraid. It's very unfortunate, deeply, deeply unfortunate. It's that time again. We've got to talk about the Welsh national rugby team.
Worse than that, the men's rugby team.
Of the most unfortunate things you can do, one of the most unfortunate activities in the year of our Lord 2025. And yet, as we stand here, Wales are about to play in the Six Nations, in which the mood has probably never been lower. There was more hope going into last year. We obviously finished with a wooden spoon for the first time since 2002, and finished completely winless, losing to literally everyone. It was as
Other than the Queensland Reds, huge win that was.
Oh, I meant just in the Six Nations, but yeah, over the full year, lost every registered test match, are on a record losing streak at this point, and they start off in France.
Easy enough task, right?
Yeah,
you know, the union's on fire. Nobody's sure if they want our greatest ever coach at the moment still about. You know, we don't really know who's available and who's not. Yeah, don't worry, lads. You can play against these lot, can't you?
Crack on.
15 of the best players in the world.
I just did the Love of Rugby podcast with Ben Youngs and Dan Cole, and Ben said that he's my friend now. Ben, you know, I'll call him Lenny, but he said, like, actually in some ways Wales are more dangerous because they're a complete free hit. Every single match for them, including the Italy game, is a free hit, and there is no stakes in them whatsoever. They expect to lose every single game, and yet you look at the personnel in that team, right, and you can go through the team, and there are a handful of world-class players available. Dewi Lake is injured. He's going to be missing as one of those kind of 3, maybe possibly 4 world-class players Wales have available to them. You have players in that team that can cause proper damage.
Yeah. And you think about, Warren Gatland was recently asked, do you honestly think you're going to go on and win the tournament? And he kind of went, sure, like that, in that way that Warren Gatland does. And I think it's just, I've been brainwashed as a Welsh rugby fan for the last sort of 20-odd years. And I went, oh, wait, that means we're going to do it, doesn't it? And obviously that's not what it means. Obviously that's not going to happen. Well, but that weird kind of instilled confidence in the way Gatland says it was, look, it gave me more hope than if he went, oh, of course we are. Like, we're always back this, that and the other.
What he went on to say is if we win that first game against France, then I think we can go on and win a championship. And I would agree with him on that, right?
Yes.
I think it's very much the Welsh way, is everything is terrible, it's the best ever, it's the worst ever. Like, it's just how the Welsh work as a people, right? And I think either Wales are going to finish 5th or 6th, nailed on, or they finish first. I don't see a world in which they finish 2nd, 3rd or 4th. Like, I think there's a chance that they beat France in that opening game. It's a slim chance, but like, you're giving France maybe 97, 98% odds, right? In that 2 to 3% world where Wales go and win that game, which is a world in which Antoine Dupont is suddenly hit by a massive truck the day before the game. He miraculously recovers 2 days later because, you know, the truck doesn't, but Dupont is fine. But
look, it's a generous 3% that we're giving Wales.
In that world, in that 2% world, right, I think Wales might go on and win the tournament. I think in the other 97%, it is basically a hiding to nothing, and they might win 1 game.
I am just going to clip you up saying,
I think Wales might go on and win the tournament.
Put that no context out there, because that's obviously not what we're saying. But I know what you mean. Like, firstly, the fact of like momentum. Anybody who has France first up, if you get that, there is that whole thing of belief and so on. And also, it's a fact of science that if you can beat this French team, you can win a Six Nations.
Yeah, if you can beat the
Wales
best team in the Six Nations, France probably go in as favourites for this tournament. They do for me anyway. They'd be my favourites going in here. They're the team I expect to win it.
Yeah.
If they can beat them, you can beat anyone else.
Yeah.
Warren Gatland has named a squad. The squad was not well received by Welsh fans.
Shock.
I think that's been a standing item of late. However, it's more than, and we talked about this in a video on Gatland before the Autumn Internationals, it's more than just, well, they're not picking X player, especially X player from my club, right? Or X player that's been on form but is uncapped or hasn't played for Wales in a while. The issue is, I have no idea what Gatland's overall strategy is with this squad.
Yeah, I don't want us to spend too much time talking about who's not in the squad.
Yeah, exactly, because it's kind of pointless.
There's weird things around, like the Max Llewellyn thing, when he's been on really good form for Gloucester. Didn't do that much in the Autumn International, so I get it from that standpoint. I think we'll talk a little bit about the centres that he has picked later on, but that's obviously a bit of a confusing one. I kind of get it, but also, personally, I really like Max Llewellyn, so maybe, you know,
he's a top try scorer in the Premiership this season.
Yeah.
if you didn't get the most out of a player performing really well for their club, you have to ask questions about yourself rather than about them, I think.
Yeah, and the system that you're trying to run, and who you're partnering them with.
And he particularly mentioned a game against South Africa, right, where if you go and look at that game, Wales barely had the ball. They barely had a chance to attack. When they did have it, it was a couple of phases and they kicked it away. And then when it did get wider, Cologne was running good dummy lines. You've got to take more into account than just his touches on the ball.
Agreed.
Which has obviously happened. Like, people who take one Gatland quote and blow it out of proportion as being, this is entirely what's happened. A bit like him saying Morgan Morris's uses on both sides, on only one side of the ball. These things get taken out of proportion.
Sure.
Clearly, he's taken a far more holistic view. But the one that really stinks to me is Cam Winnett.
Yes. That's so baffling because last Six Nations, it's not unfair to say he was Wales' best player in that tournament, and one of the best across the calendar year. And I understood there was the moments in the summer and the autumn just gone where he's gone, I'm going to shuffle my back three.
Yeah.
Maybe move Blair Murray back a little bit, bring Liam Williams in, whatever it is, and kind of go, let's try something different. Just keep the opposition on their toes a little bit with the back three. I get it. To remove him from the squad entirely just seems such a weird decision.
Yeah. So Gatland talked in last year's Six Nations. There was a game against England where they were talking about, they were going to put Dav Jenkins at 6. But he said, what we've got to accept is this year's Six Nations and this current squad, what it's about is building young players into senior players, right? So we put Alex Mann in at 6 for his first start of international rugby. Mann scores a try and has a very good game and kind of nailed himself down for that tournament, then hasn't been involved in the squad since, which is the other bizarre point. Because he hasn't carried over that approach squad to squad, right? And in the autumn, he said it's about getting in and winning. So we recalled a lot of more senior players, like Gareth Anscombe, who also isn't in the squad. And it left you in the situation now where I don't know what the identity of this squad is. If the autumn squad was about winning and the squad in the Six Nations last year was about blooding young players, this one doesn't feel like it's about either. And the key thing for Cam Winnett, he's still a young player, he's still, 22 years old, right? He's had this 4-year playing for Wales, and I understand maybe he's, exhausted, there's player fatigue, whatever, and you may want Liam Williams to come in and play at fullback instead, who's been recalled. However, it feels like a massive man management error to drop him from the squad entirely.
Also, because
he is going to be the long-term fullback, and I think that was fairly nailed on. Even if Liam Williams is your starting fullback, Cam Winnett is the second best 15 available.
You've seen enough in Cam Winnett to know that he will be able to keep that shirt safe for a bit if Wales become good again.
Have him in the squad.
Have him train with Liam Williams, who's a legendary Welsh fullback. Get him to learn off him.
And the other point is, right, Liam Williams at Saracens now, he'll have to go back to his club in the off weeks.
Yeah.
Right? So you want Cam Winnett in there, so you've got someone, an experienced fullback, a proper fullback, who can be there week in, week out.
He can act as Liam Williams in training.
Yeah. So that becomes the whole bizarre point. However, the more concerning thing, I think, on an actual, game-to-game basis, is if you run through this squad and you take the exact combinations that are played together in each kind of set of positions. So you take the front row, the second row, the back row, the half-backs, the centres, and the back three, right? If you look through each unit and select the team based on the players in the squad who play together the most often in Test match rugby. So there's a few positions like centre, obviously Eddie James and Joe Roberts are both in. They play together at the Scarlets week in, week out. Sure. They've got more relationship together, Ellis Bevan and Ben Thomas play together at Cardiff. And obviously Thomas normally plays as a 12, yet is in as a fly half. They have played together at Cardiff though. So if you ignore that and just look purely on Test rugby, right? The combination that has played the most games together for Wales is a draw between the front row and the centres.
Okay.
Right?
What specific players are we talking there?
So who would you guess is the centre combo possible from this squad that has won the most caps together, played the most games starting together for Wales?
Oh, God. I've just realised. It's Nick Tompkins and Owen Watkin, isn't it?
It's Nick Tompkins and Owen Watkin.
Which I literally off the top of my head couldn't name you a single game they've started together. There must be a few of them out there.
They've started 3 times together.
Right, yeah. It's hardly a well-established telekinetic centre
2
combo,
of them under Wayne Pivac.
Right.
During his last Six Nations in charge.
I've just trauma dumped, blocked them out of my memory.
Yeah, and then once last year. So they've played 3 games together, right, ever. That's it. That's the most experienced unit they can put together in the Six Nations. The front row of Gareth Thomas, Elliot Dee and Kieran Azarati played together 3 times last year. That was only because of injuries in several positions, right? They've also played together 3 times. Those are the most experienced units Wales can put together. And yet you compare this to Ireland, right? And from their likely starting team, the unit that's played together the least often, the fewest amount of times, is the halfbacks in Crowley and Gibson Park.
Wow.
And they've still played together 12 times.
They're a really established halfback combo.
the lowest point in the Irish team of cohesion still is more than a fully added together Welsh team in terms of their starts together.
That's mad. Obviously, there's a flip side to that in that Ireland are often criticised for not building depth.
Yeah.
And
that's the other thing. That's the other side of the coin, right?
Yeah. But also, would you rather have a good team and then you can drip feed people in? Yes, you would.
Exactly.
Rather than a load of people who are kind of understand how to play international rugby. And both of those, the front row and centre combo you named just there, I wouldn't be able to tell you with confidence that's going to be the centre combo that Wales are going to play.
I don't think it'll be the front row. And I don't think it'll be the centre combo probably, but I think it's possible. The second row that's played together for Wales, the most of players in the squad, Jenkins and Will Rowlands, they've played together twice. They've had more games off the bench together, but they've started together twice. The back row, you've got either Wainwright, Morgan, Falatau's played together twice, or both of Morgan, Wainwright's played together twice. So you've got two units that play together twice, and that's the only options you've got available there in terms of familiarity with each other.
They're both quite good options.
They're good options. That is Wales' strength. Like the back row, you've got international standard players.
The sad thing is, basically everyone else's strength.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The halfbacks, Bevan and Ben Thomas, have played together twice, the two tests in Australia last year. And in the back three, Tom Rogers, Liam Williams and Josh Adams have played together once.
Wow.
And that is your lot. Like, there are not any established units available. Like, if you go over the centres in particular, that becomes the real issue, right? Because, as I say, the most frequent partnership is players that played together 3 times.
Yeah.
In the autumn, it felt very much like they were blooding Ben Thomas and Max Llewellyn, who played all 3 games together. They started all 3 games together as the combo, right? Yeah. Last summer, it felt very much like Owen Watkin and Mason Grady was being blooded as the combo. Now, Mason Grady's injured, but he was moved onto the wing for the autumn.
Yeah.
Which I think is his best position for me.
Agreed.
And we're now left with this situation, right, where like you look at the options available. Nick Tompkins and Joe Roberts have played together once. Watkins and Roberts have played together once. Tompkins and Watkins 3 times, as I mentioned. Watkin, rather, there's only one Owen Watkin. Like, you're left with the situation where, you know, Eddie James hasn't started a game for Wales, a proper test match for Wales, played against the Reds, obviously. Obviously, everyone...
He's unbeaten in the Welsh starting jersey.
That's true. Yeah. But it just leaves you in the situation where there are no combinations available, and you're going to need to blood those in and build those over the course of the Six Nations for the second Six Nations running. In many ways, actually, the third Six Nations running. Like, that Wales are trying to blood new players.
And the only names in there that strike me as proper international level 13s are Owen Watkin, who has been on brilliant form for the Ospreys at the moment. He's one of the shining lights at the moment of Welsh regional rugby. Like,
I think Owen Watkin is massively underrated because he's a very defensive player. And I think it's one of these things about Welsh rugby is Welsh fans traditionally would much rather a flary player who has some rough edges than a player who's boring but excellent, like Owen Watkin, like Adam Beard. You know, like Gareth Thomas has become that as well in that front row. Like players who just do their job brilliantly but don't have any flair to them whatsoever. Watkin is one of those. Like, he's been playing quietly very well.
The other one is Joe Roberts, who I think is a really interesting selection. I think he's a very Gatland sort of a player where it's like, you know what, we can get more than some of his parts out of him. Obviously, Gatland absolutely loves having a left-footed option in the back line. Other than that, Ellis Bevan's the only left-footer. I think maybe Blair Murray. So, frankly, that's a really good option for him to have. And there's a good bit of competition there. And they are both nowadays proper 13s, whereas Llewellyn is anywhere from 12 to 14. You know?
And I think Joe Roberts has the absolute potential to be a proper nailed-on test starter.
It's difficult in the situation he's in because he's not playing in a winning team. You know? And
so he's got much better this season, but he spent most of it out.
I meant Wales.
Oh, okay. Right, I assume you meant the Scarlets losing. I'm often thinking about the Scarlets losing.
Another area I want to talk about then, as well, so I talked about the centres a little bit there. I want to briefly touch on the second row.
Okay.
So you mentioned there that Rowlands and Jenkins started once together, and that's kind of, or twice together, and that's as strong as
you can get.
A cohesion unit you can get for there.
Obviously Shunzer and Jenkins play together at Exeter as well.
Yes, of
course.
That's
the other option.
The elephant in the room with that is that Adam Beard is out injured. So Adam Beard's a very divisive figure because he is exceptional at the line-out and doesn't offer much else around the park, right? And I think that's a very widely bandied about and actually very fair criticism of Adam Beard, right? Because sure, he doesn't offer much around the park, but the autumn did show us what happens when you take him out the team.
I'll throw up this stat again, right?
Go on.
In 2023, Wales' line-out percentage with Adam Beard was 91%. Without Adam Beard, it was 71%. In 2024, with Adam Beard, it was 93%. Without Adam Beard, it was 72%. Like, he's worth 20 to 23% extra line-out ball.
Of every time the opposition kicks a touch.
Yeah.
You know, other than penalty.
Or you win a penalty.
You win a penalty, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that's a huge differential. And you often made the comparison before. Franz Malherbe, right, doesn't offer much around the park, but he's a genuinely exceptional scrummager, one of the best scrummagers that the game's ever seen. And he's undoubtedly worth it because he wins you a penalty every time you get a scrum, or the opposition drop the ball, essentially. So with that, Beard is out. And sure, you might gain something around the park.
Yeah.
And yes, it means that your line-out is depleted. So the person with Beard out, that I think might come in instead of any of the people we've previously mentioned. I think Teddy Williams might be the guy that he turns to.
Teddy Williams came through at first as, he's often said, Leonie Nakamura is his favourite player of all time. Mm-hmm. And he came through at first and he was doing the big offloading thing and carrying the ball in one hand.
The Seb Davis thing.
And and that was kind of his thing, as he threw offloads and he ran lines and he occasionally did the odd kick. And that felt like who he was. He was this kind of very lightweight second row. And this season, I think he's really kicked on. He had a taste of international rugby and he was clearly told what you need to do to be a serious player is line out, maul, scrum. And he has added that to his game tenfold and it's got better and better. And over the last month in particular, I think he's gone up gears.
Christmas derbies and so on, which are kind of the biggest, highest level of rugby he's been exposed to this season.
I think so, yeah.
I think he really stood out to me in the Cardiff Ospreys game in particular, where the Ospreys had the majority of the possession, a lot of it in the Cardiff 22. And he was constantly turning these Ospreys attacking positions into collapsed mauls, into turnovers, into just messy ball to play off, slowing the ball down, whatever it was. And I really rate that about him. The maul defence is a big thing that Adam Beard brings on D. Yeah. I think his tackle count's really good as well.
It is.
For Teddy Williams, who's very solid. The one question mark is, every time Wales bring in a new second row, there's always the question of how will they step up to be line-out caller, you know? Somebody like Dav Jenkins, who's actually a really solid set-piece second row, really struggled with the pressure of being line-out caller, for instance. Will Rowlands, whenever he's had to step in, exactly the same. That is the one big concern from them, for me.
The thing about Teddy Williams, I think, is he is a brilliant line-out operator on the opposition's ball in particular. So Cardiff this season, their line-out percentage isn't great, but, obviously he hasn't been calling, he hasn't played necessarily every single game, so you can't pin it entirely on him. But, right, the Ospreys, you mentioned that Christmas derby, have currently the second highest line-up success rate of any team in any of the three major European leagues, right, this season so far. And yet, the game against Cardiff, where they played on New Year's Day, is the lowest their line-up success has been in 2 seasons.
Wow.
Against Teddy Williams. He saw 2 lineouts on that day. He's up there for most lineout steals in the URC this season. And defensively, and at the maul in particular, they're really solid. Cardiff have, statistically, the best maul in the URC, which sounds unlikely, but in terms of actually making metres off their mauls, the higher percentage of their mauls make yardage than any other team. And defensively, their maul is up there as well as one of the best. And I think a lot of that is him really kicking on developing that part of his game. Yeah. And I'd be really interested to see him get a chance to come in. And
I'd like to see it.
Will Rowlands looked very off form and out of sorts in the autumn. And obviously, nothing's really going well at Racing at the minute. Everyone seems off form there. So,
other than Dan Lancaster, obviously.
Obviously, he's infallible and needs to play every single game, But I think that's an interesting point. I think Teddy Williams and Dav Jenkins maybe as a combo to look at. And Jenkins can take on the line-out calling and allow Teddy Williams to ease his way in because he's got a handful of
see how they go with that.
I don't think he's started a game yet for Wales.
So there's one more, I think, big talking point that we need to discuss on this while we're here. The elephant in the room is a lot of people are very critical of the fact that Warren Gatland has picked one out-and-out 10, as well as Ben Thomas, who is usually a 12, has kind of been Wales' starting 12 as of late, but has done well when he's played at 10 himself. Would do a job at 10, right? And alongside that, he has picked the incumbent 21-year-old Ospreys fly half, Dan Edwards.
Yes. Dan, the man, the real deal, as I keep calling him. He is, for me, the best prospect at fly half Wales have produced since Reece Patchell about a decade ago. I think in the last the kind of post-regional change, so you're looking at 2007 onwards of players that came through exclusively through the regional model, right? Fly half Wales developed, I think, a proper international 10s. You had Dan Biggar, obviously. You had Priestland and Jason Tovey came through at the same time. And it was this is really working as a 10 factory, it's back up and running. Since then, I think it's slowed down a bit. We had Patchell, We had Sam Davies, who was solid, and is doing incredibly well in France now. Sam de Pompier. And then we had Costello, who I think's ceiling is incredibly high. Pulled up injured, broken his collarbone, so he's going to be out for the entire tournament. He's out for 12 weeks. Could be back for the summer, though. Should be back for the summer. However, I think Dan Edwards is interesting because I think his level of talent is not necessarily Costello's, but his application of it is the best of any 10 we've had since Bigger.
Sure.
Dan Edwards, for me, is a bit like, for people that haven't seen much of him or haven't seen him play or maybe only know him for kicking that one-drop goal during the Six Nations break week the other year. He is, for me, almost like a Gen Z reboot of Dan Bigger, in that he's got that kind of like bravado and confidence and kicking game, but he's incredibly laid back.
Yeah.
And he's incredibly relaxed and nothing seems to faze him whatsoever. Where Bigger was very shouty, in your face and millennial, Dan Edwards is like very, very laid back.
I think with Dan Edwards, personally, I find it more interesting to analyse the personality rather than the rugby player, because there are lots of great highlights. Like, he's got great gas, he's got a really good boot on him, really good attacking, like organiser and game manager, right? All of this is great. He's got all the raw materials of a really good club level player who can play at international level. But as you say, the difference between him and a lot of the fly-offs Wales have produced recently is there is just a real swagger to him.
Yeah.
And I really like that. We had it like last year when we went to visit the Ospreys. And I remember just outside the stadium seeing him walking around, and it was just like his body language was extremely like shoulders puffed out, like the real confident kid. And that just comes across on the pitch. Like, he looks like he's just laughing whenever he does stuff on the pitch. Like, I'm not going to quite say it's nowhere near the level of like a Finn Russell. Right?
No.
But there is something about really satisfying about watching a fly half like that who is clearly just playing the game. Of what rugby is, likes entertaining, likes messing about a little bit on the pitch. And there's something to him like with that, especially when he's playing with his mates with the Ospreys.
Yeah.
And I do think that, on what we were saying earlier about Watkin and Roberts, if you stick Watkin with him, you give him a bit of familiarity. It's another reason why I would have liked to see Ruben Morgan-Williams in as a 9 from the squad, just because I think if you give him some familiarity, a few people that he's maybe played under 20s with, a few people that he knows pretty well, let him run things in training. Let him pick the spots where you're going to. Because if he has this thought of, I'm having everything run through me, I think Wales need a bit of arrogance in the 10 jersey.
Absolutely. I think that's the thing they've been missing.
Yeah.
Is there's an awful lot of, like, Sam Costello's a very nice lad and an incredibly talented player, but I don't think he's been pushed in the right way. And I don't think he himself is the sort who will go, no, I'm the dog's bollocks. Like,
exactly.
I'm the guy. Where I think Dan Edwards will look at that squad and go, I'm the only 10. Yeah, right, your problems are solved. That win rate ends in Paris on the 31st.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's a very different mindset that we've seen.
If you think of pretty much all of the great, at least Northern Hemisphere fly halves, they all have something of that to them. You look at Bigger, you look at Sexton, you look at Farrell, you look at Finn Russell. Like, there is something of that. So even like Garbisi coming through at the moment, Ontamax is slightly different. But Jalibert, for
Ontamax
instance,
completely believes his own hype, though.
Oh, 100%.
He just he doesn't have to. He just knows he's better than everyone else.
Yeah,
because he is.
He doesn't need to tell you.
Yeah, because the first time he met someone that's better than him was Antoine Dupont, right? And he's always been on the same team.
Yeah, 100%. So Dan Edwards I'm really hyped for.
Yeah.
A lot of people are probably unhappy with the fact that it is putting all the eggs in one basket. And sure, it's risky because what if he has a bad Six Nations? But also, I think he's confident enough, and famous last words I know, that he will ride that out and just go, yeah, well, just do it again in a couple of months.
Yeah.
I
think there's two sides to this, right? One is, if Gareth Anscombe was in the squad, and he obviously has been carrying an injury when the squad was named, he will be available to play for Gloucester over the coming weeks, like before the first game. He'll be fit for that first game in Paris. So he would have been available for it. I think it would have been good to have someone for Dan Edwards to learn off.
Yeah, I agree.
Right, because he is, by all accounts, having spoken to coach at the Ospreys and spoken to players at the Ospreys, by all accounts, he is very, very good at picking the brains of players like Owen Williams, who obviously is an experienced 10, has been around the block, who he completely dethroned and knocked out the team. And Owen Williams can't get a game now, where Dan Edwards just taken his place. But also, Wales are in such a big, desperate situation. Genuinely, if there's any player in Wales who can turn it around, I think it might be him. And I don't want to put too much pressure on him, but
I wouldn't phrase it like that, but I completely agree with you.
Yeah. And that is the thing. And I just want to take a look at his game, right? Because I am so excited by every aspect of this kid's game. And he is my favourite topic at the minute. And if you're watching this, chances are an awful lot of every Wales video over this coming tournament is going to be just looking at Dan Edwards' performances, because I'm obsessed with him, because I think he's just brilliant. And I want to focus a little bit on his defence first up, because he reminds me an awful lot of Marcus Smith, and Marcus Smith is a massively, massively underrated defender. You know, we pulled this up in the office earlier, but like, Marcus Smith's tackle completion rate this season is 20% higher than Andre Pollard's. Like, he's a really, really good defender, Marcus Smith. He just flies up and always throws himself at everything, and if he falls off tackles, he always works as a speed bump.
His tackle completion is the same as Mario Itoje's.
Yeah. And if you look at Dan Edwards, right, because he is physically really quite small, and I think that's been the doubt over him in international rugby. He's not like Dan Biggar, who was physically a big enough guy. He's bulked up in the off-season. He now has kind of filled out his frame a little bit. He's still only 21, so he might grow a bit more. But he is physically quite small. However, a lot of 10s would hide him, a lot of teams would get him out of the way, a lot of teams would be afraid by this. Dan Edwards for the Ospreys, and this is partly Mark Jones' defensive system, partly Edwards himself, blitzes. And what they tend to do with him is they have him, the moment the ball comes off a line out, he just blitzes straight up. And he goes like to get in the eye line, to get up, to try and make a hit, even if it just slows them down. Like, they absolutely sling him out of line. And we often see him then, and I love this, going in for jackals on first phase. Like, he loves to go for it, and he won one against Cardiff that he then kicked the points himself. But like, that is something he'll do. He throws himself in and gets involved. And I think a big part of that, as much as anything, is his mindset and attitude of like wanting to throw himself at them.
Yeah.
And almost being like, it throws a defence off, you know? Like, you expect the 10 to be hiding and you expect to be able to target the 10. He takes that away because defensively he's so aggressive. Like, you can't target him because he's targeting you.
Remember that thing Johnny Sexton did in his career where every time, like in the first 20 minutes of every game, he would just run at the biggest player?
Yeah,
he would always just do it. He'd get the ball, and whether it was the right option or not, he would just do it. Probably as a means of just going like, go on then. Like, I'm showing I'm hard enough. Don't run at me. Like, because I will actually like put a hit on you. And I like that in a 10, that they're willing to put themselves about like that.
Edwards is not going to be the most physically dominant defender, but he will throw himself into tackles so that you can't throw anything at him. Like, he doesn't allow you that option to target him. And I love that about him.
It gives you a bit of a head start as a 10 winning your first caps.
I'm also a huge fan of his game management, and it's something that's been talked about a lot, is that he's a very instinctive player and he likes to spot things on the moment. But I want to pull up 2 moments from 2 different games against the Stormers. One away here, and this is just like a brilliant run of phases of him managing, of him moving the Stormers defence left and right in the same channel until eventually on the final phase the winger comes up because he's been playing it wide repeatedly off these phases, at which point he drops a lovely grubber in behind and Luke Morgan sprints on. It stops at a perfect moment for Luke Morgan. It doesn't bounce up in the way you'd hope, but Morgan still beats him, finishes the try, scores, right? It's brilliantly worked. Like, I could break it down in much more detail, but the point is essentially he has pulled them left and right to pull, I think, it's Zaz on the wing, like up into the line so that he's not paying attention to the backfield because he's just figured, well, this is what this young 10's doing. He's going, you know, back and forth. But this moment in the game against the Stormers, return game at home late last year, just before the autumn internationals, is perhaps my favourite. So the Ospreys have a long sequence of attack. Things aren't going, you know, beautifully. They're sort of, you know, making some ground, but not a huge amount. One poor pass comes. Edwards himself has to take it into contact because the alignment's gone. He gets back up to his feet slowly whilst Ruben Morgan-Williams takes over and plays a couple of phases from 9. He instantly, the moment he gets onto his feet, jogs back into the pocket, sits back and kicks a drop goal. They're 1 or 2 points up here. He hits over the drop goal. They suddenly have a lead that, you know, demands a try. I think they're up to 5-point lead. And he just knows that's coming. Same thing against Montpellier. They have a sequence of phases that's going nowhere. He drops into the pocket, he takes 3 points. I love his game management and his like backing himselfness. You know, the drop goal against Ulster's the famous one now because, you know, he won it in the last minute. That was his first game of 80 minutes of professional rugby. Wow. Which is the amazing thing.
It is the maturity for a 21-year-old, isn't it? And for somebody who is so willing to make mistakes as well. And like those will be ironed out the more and more experience he gets at high levels.
So much of Wales' problem over the last couple of years has been the attack. It's been a fact that they're not taking points when they get into positions, right? Edwards will step up and go, we're going nowhere, I'm going to take 3 points.
Yeah.
And I think that
Screw
is
the game plan.
Yeah. That is the thing that gives me a lot of hope, you know? And if he's doing that after a handful of games with the Ospreys, they'll be more encouraged. They're a more conservative team than Gatland clearly wants Wales to be. Yeah. And yet I think Wales naturally are, especially under Warren Gatland, a more conservative team than they're trying to play to be. And they need to like settle back and find someone in the middle. And I think Edwards might be the guy for that.
That overruling, that kind of head coachiness of the fly half, it was something, again, Bigger did extremely well.
Yeah.
Think of that Scotland game where he went for the drop goal and everyone was like, what? That wasn't in the plan?
Yeah, Pivet wasn't happy about it.
Yeah, exactly. And he just went, well, I've won as the game. Like, that's the only thing that
matters.
He did.
Like, that was it. He was their man of the match and, you know.
Yeah, and again,
time.
like, I know that it's so easy to make the bigger comparisons. They're such different players, but they have very differently channeled but similar levels of confidence to like a 21-year-old Dan Bigger.
Yeah. The one other note quickly for Wales is the scrum, which I think has been a massive struggle over the last couple of years. Archie Griffin looked really solid, then injured himself during the All Internationals, hasn't played since, won't be in the squad. There is rumours, and these are at the time of recording unconfirmed, that Matt Ferguson, the Northampton scrum coach, is coming in to take over and run that scrum. He's very highly thought of. He's very kind of celebrated. His philosophy on the scrum is like very set, and he likes a very like tight and set scrum, and it's very much about like a unit, you know, being one thing and shoving through.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And I think it was something Alex Corbusier picked up about Wales as scrum under Jonathan Humphreys has been perhaps not working because they keep the second rows too far apart, and it means the number 8 like gets easier access to the ball, but it means that they're getting less weight through from the second row, which is not the way Northampton have scrummaged under Ferguson. They've been like very set as like a very tight, compact unit. So that'll be interesting if he makes a difference there. And we do have some players coming in as well, which might make a difference.
Yeah, I think regarding props, you mentioned Archie Griffin is out. In comes Will Griff-John, who has actually been playing pretty well for Sale, has been starting over Asher Apoka-Forjaw in Europe. I think the two of them kind of share the jersey a little bit. Forjaw, a really destructive scrummager. I think John, a bit more of a kind of stable scrummager, like will hold his own at scrum time, which frankly is probably what Wales need. I'll probably
Tom Francis model.
They'll probably end up being props who know that we're on about replying to this, saying that's completely the wrong way around or whatever. But Will Griff-John, I think, is, of those tight heads, the one that gives me the most confidence that he'll be able to hold his own against an Andrew Porter or a Cyril Bay or an Alice Gench or a Danilo Fischetti.
But Henry Thomas has also been around the block a lot.
Yeah.
Scrum Champion won the World Cup, has been up and down for the Scarlets, had some really, really good games at the scrum, had a couple where he struggled a bit more, but that'll be interesting. He's a tight head who I think it very much depends on the referee and what the referee likes, how he gets on. But Gatland has largely, without break glass and deploy Tom Boter, or Reece Henry, gone for scrummaging tight heads rather than keeping up the focus on ball players, which has been the case in the past. So that has some questions. There's talk of other coaches beyond Matt Ferguson coming in as well and changing things. Apparently they're going to be announced before too long. I'm not sure if that'll be announced before this video goes up, but there's potentially a lot of change with Wales. Where do you see them finishing? What would be your overall prediction for how you think the Six Nations is going to go?
The thing is, 90% of my brain is thinking it's going to be similar-ish to last year. Yeah. It's going to be seen as, it's development rather than it's winning, which I don't mind, again, going back to what I was saying, I don't mind as long as that's what it clearly is.
Yeah.
If there's a clear identity and it is that, I don't mind it. But when we're in this weird void between the two, it's a bit tough. 90% of my brain thinks that it's going to be a wooden spoon, but now we've had the Dan Edwards conversation, there's a part of me thinking, I don't think that Wales will win out in Italy. I think there might be a fluke win over a Scotland or...
My gut is England. My gut is that England game on the last day of the Six Nations. I think England are going to have a good Six Nations. I think they'll beat one of Ireland or France. And I think they'll probably, the week before that, take the Calcutta Cup back in Scotland. That'll be their big, like, emotional moment. And they'll be like, this is brilliant. Here we are. We're, like, going for it. If we win this, we finish second or whatever. And then they just have their foot off the gas, which we saw against Australia, right? And against Fiji, a year beforehand, where they just slip up because they just take their foot off the gas for a moment because the emotional energy isn't there. And they're such an emotionally driven team. And that's the thing they need to learn over the next year for England. We'll get into that in another episode. But I think that is the game for Wales to target, is that England game up last. And
Gatland keeps his job.
Yeah.
if Wales beat England in Cardiff, Gatland's just going to keep his job. It's that simple. He's never going to leave.
Italy away is winnable. It's doable.
Oh, yeah, it is.
A good Six Nations for Wales is beating Italy and England, right?
Yeah.
Very good Six Nations.
I would take that.
A very good Six Nations is winning one of those other games as well.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
winning against France, Scotland, or Ireland.
But what about winning a Grand Slam? That'd be pretty good, wouldn't it?
That would be fantasy land.
Yeah.
Dan Edwards would be named Prime Minister. Wales would declare independence, and Dan Edwards is President of the world, and Dewi Lake Foreign Secretary.
You heard it here first.